Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Tom, we've talked about the tsunami of stress, some of those basic patterns where we've seen, the stages of the tsunami of stress, this perpetual cycle of fight and flight. And what I'd love us to just dip into today are something that you call core issues. And they somehow interplay with tsunami. Would you start us up and talk about those? And how did you even come up with those core issues? How did you identify them?
Yes, absolutely. And how I identify them is because I'm a human being and all human beings experience them, and I observe them in myself and I observe them in other people. The tsunami of stress is that escalating pattern of flight or fight. And we attempt to flee the threat, avoid it, escape it. And some people will say, well, there's freeze, flight, fight.
Yeah.
Freeze and flight are simply versions of the same thing. We attempt to avoid a sense of, or whatever that threat is that we sense or perceive. And so we freeze in place like a bunny. I don't know. And it can't see me. Oh, it can see me. And then it runs away. Still the same thing. It's just avoiding the threat. And if it can't avoid the threat, then we attempt to fight the threat. Mm-hmm. And it's this escalating pattern, which I call the tsunami of stress.
Yes.
Well, that escalating pattern of and why it escalates is related to core issues that are expressed and reacted to. So as human beings, we experience change. There is no life without change. And some people are averse to change. Other people thrive on change. But there is change. We are growing, our environment changes, relationships change, situations in life change, our body is constantly changing. So change is inherent in the nature of an organism. Change is life. Life is change. How we experience it is the issue. So the tsunami of stress is a function of reactivity to sensed or perceived threat to well-being. So we sense a threat to well-being. And remember, we have, as human beings, not just 5 senses, we have 21 human senses. The vast majority of what we experience through our senses is going on under the surface. We're not even aware of it, but our brain is processing all that information. When we encounter sensory information that relates to an unresolved trauma or chronic stressor, then we are reactive to it as if we are experiencing that threat right now, which is why the classic characteristic of trauma is that the reaction is out of proportion to what's happening now. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's out of proportion to what's happening now is because it isn't just in terms of our neurobiology, it isn't what's just happening now. It's what's happened now, consistent with all the other times we've experienced something like that, and including the original experience that was either traumatic or stressful.
Yes.
And then we're reactive to that.
So what happens is that there's something that happens in our day-to-day lives that, actually potentially isn't threatening at all, but it is so similar to something that happened all the way back that never really got normalized, that we experience the whole lot of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when I deal with a war vet and they're telling me their story, which I discourage them from doing because until we've done autonomic healing, which normalizes that, they're going to be traumatized by that because they're dealing with that sensory information related to the trauma. And the Vietnam War vet that I treated, and he was reactive to my desk lamp because he'd been in a bunker, a rocket had hit it, the yellow flash, the concussive force, triggered the onset of PTSD that had never been normalized. He reacted to my desk lamp as if that was a threat to his well-being.
Yeah.
Which increases the threat because on a level of consciousness, he knows it's not. but his neurobiology was reactive to it. So it can be either a sensed threat to well-being or it can be a perceived threat to well-being. The way we think about things as human beings tends not to be actually rational. We tend to have what I call seemingly rational perceptions, or they may actually be irrational.
Yeah.
And the degree to which we are caught up in that seemingly rational perception pattern, which is another part of all of this, is the degree to which the stress that we are reactive to is either managed or perceived as manageable. And to the degree where we're not managing the stress or we don't perceive it or sense it as manageable, then we get caught up in this tsunami and this escalating pattern because of the underlying core issues.
Yeah. So change itself, there's some purpose for change, but it's whether or not we sense it as a threat or we sense it as an opportunity.
Exactly.
Yes. And one of the ways you've described to me about the core issues are that there are these parts to our being that are like a building that actually, when it's like different levels of a building in us, and when one starts to fall, the other starts to fall, and they almost have a pattern of their own, but that interact with the tsunami of stress. Would you talk about that a little bit more?
I've likened it to a 4-story building or 4 dominoes that are stacked. And what happens is that they are functionally unsound. They're unstable. And that primary core issue that every human being struggles with, and the ones who say they don't are just not being truthful with themselves and hearing what other people would tell them, that fundamental core issue is a sense of inadequacy and insecurity. Now, that may be very specific to a particular situation or issue. It may be generalized across the board to all sorts of different ones, but the sense is of inadequacy and insecurity. And that produces a sense of incapability. I can't manage this situation. I can't cope with this. And so that is why we experience a sense of stress and need.
Yeah.
And that's different for me than it would be for you. And this particular thing may not affect you at all. And I'm losing my mind and I'm getting all stressed out and full of need about whatever that was because of my own prior life experiences. And that stress and need relates to and is a function of the inadequacy and insecurity.
Wow. And so that's that is actually the first stage of the tsunami. And that within that stage, the first core issue to really be affected is this inadequacy and insecurity that we all have. To some degree or another. Change happens. We are in this tsunami of stress and need happens, and then we inevitably feel that inadequacy or the insecurity that can come. Are those two different things?
Yes.
Yeah, would you explain that a bit more?
Security is a sense of I am safe.
Yeah.
I'm secure. I can even be threatened, but I can respond to that sense of threat. Incapability, insecurity, and incapable is different from that. It's not just that I'm not safe. I can't and I'm not capable of responding and managing this stress, this issue.
Yeah, I can really identify. I know that for me, one of the things that I've struggled with in the past is some hypochondria, which is actually something that not many people talk about. It feels like it's something that seems in my own journey that has been full of shame or condemnation. However, actually thinking back through that the inadequacy, the insecurity, I can't even cope with it. That first feeling was the first, I can identify with that, the first feeling that came with that tsunami of stress that would inevitably come if I was in that cycle, in that particular space. So yeah, I'm sure that that's applied in all sorts of different spaces,
Absolutely.
Whatever the struggles may be. So then we've got this domino effect. So that's our first core issue. So what happens that next?
So then, because of the stress and need that is activated, because of the core issue of inadequacy and insecurity, then where that escalates into from that flee the threat is into a fight the threat response where I experience a sense of distress and discontent. I'm not a happy camper, and I'm definitely not able to become a happy camper, because the core issue that follows on the inadequacy and insecurity is a sense of feeling powerless. And I sense myself as powerless. I believe myself to be powerless. I perceive myself to be powerless, which doesn't even mean that's actually the truth or a reality, but that is my sensed core issue. I'm powerless. Well, why am I powerless? Because I'm inadequate and insecure. Well, of course I would be powerless then to do anything about it. Being powerless, I experience a sense of distress and discontent, so I fight the threat.
Right. Wow. So that's the second stage of tsunami, and then the second core issue, feeling powerless. I'm sure so many of our listeners would identify with that. I think that feeling is just such a human feeling, isn't it? And it's awful.
Oh, yes.
And no wonder we fight. We're trying to get out of that sense of feeling powerless.
And that powerlessness is why we have what is called negative anticipation. We expect something bad to happen. We misread people's responses. We misread situations, and we anticipate something negative. And the reason we anticipate it as negative is because we sense that we are powerless to do anything about it.
Yes.
And I can't affect change in a positive direction. And the direction of the change is anticipated to be negative.
So in some ways, we would project or self-protect in that situation to try and avoid, which is the fight. It's like, I'm not going to sit here and be powerless. I'm going to fight this.
Yes, exactly. And that may just escalate the situation further, because then either the person or the situation or whatever it is that I'm dealing with, I'm not effectively managing it. I'm not in the zone and dealing with the challenge. I'm starting to screw things up and my performance suffers. And I just am more and more distressed and discontented with the situation, because inadequate and insecure, I'm powerless, and then it escalates from that flee the threat, inadequacy and insecurity, fight the threat, feeling powerless. It's still there. That threat is still there. It hasn't been managed. It hasn't been addressed. It hasn't even been perceived as, well, this could be a positive thing. Yeah. This could actually be beneficial change. But it's a change in a negative direction. And so the tsunami escalates into avoidance and isolation, because the core issue attached to this now flee the threat, because I tried fleeing, I tried fighting, I'm back to fleeing, because the core issue with this is a lack of control. And now it's all about control, and I don't have it, the situation has it, the other person has it, society has it, something has it, they have it, somebody has it, but I don't have it, and I lack control. And the reason that we avoid and isolate is because we sense and perceive ourselves as having a lack of control. And this is a control issue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can see the escalation there, even in the core issues, without, and then pull them into the tsunami of stress too. And why people just like suddenly back off and
I'm out.
Why wouldn't you? In some ways, if you're feeling inadequate, insecure, you're powerless, and now suddenly it's like, well, I can't control it, so I may as well just go away somewhere and hide myself under a rock.
And that is a way to control.
Yes.
I'm in control. Why? I'm gone. I am in control because I'm not around. I'm not here.
Yeah.
I'm not involved.
And what do you, have you seen, what would you describe the behaviour in that space? Have you seen any examples of that?
Oh, countless. I was a psychotherapist. I've been a psychotherapist for 20 plus years, and I treated offenders. I've treated victims. I was a minister. I saw all sorts of ways that people would use even their spiritual beliefs as an escape. And a way to not have to deal with things. And ways that we avoid and isolate, sometimes we just don't talk, or we shift the subject, or we literally get up and walk away. And the message inherently is flee the threat. I'm out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I have this lack of control. I can't control what's happening. So I'm out.
Yeah, you're right. There's, in some ways, it is trying, the avoidance and isolation is a plea in some ways to try and gain control. So I'm in control if I can avoid it, or if I can't avoid it, maybe I'll just isolate and then I don't even have to deal with it. It's really interesting.
But what we don't deal with doesn't get better.
True. Unfortunately, right?
It's like having weeds in a lawn. You don't deal with it, then you stop having a lawn and you have weeds. And then it escalates again because we tried to flee the threat because of the inadequacy and the insecurity. And then we tried to fight the threat because of a sense of feeling powerless. Then we tried to avoid and isolate. And that was just a matter of who's got control? I don't have it, and I'm out of here. And then it escalates because the original threat may not have gone away.
Yeah.
It's still there.
Yeah.
It's still existing. And that's when we get into that fourth stage of the tsunami of stress, which is resistance. I don't want to deal with this. And this is fight time. Defiance, I'm not going to deal with this. And then we're angry at someone. Could be ourselves, could be others, a situation, and we are angry, and then we are not assertive. Because the core issue that's attached to resistance, defiance, anger, and not being assertive is poor self-image and low self-esteem. The image, the way we think about ourselves, our image of ourselves is poor. And that may be a function of comparison to others who don't have that, or I'm bad in comparison to others, or I'm lacking in comparison to others, or people have reacted to me and told me that I'm lacking in that. And it's a self-image issue, and it's a poor self-image. And then the opposite side of that same coin of self, where one side is the image, think about like a coin, usually has an image of something on one side, and the other side is self-esteem. How much is the coin worth? And it's devaluing. Yeah. And these are the core issues. Why is the image poor and why is the worth low? Because I don't have control. And I am being controlled, or something is controlling me, or I don't have it. Why don't I have control? Because I'm powerless to do anything about it. And why do I think I'm powerless? Because I'm inadequate and insecure, and I really don't want to deal with that.
I just really appreciate hearing those. I think they're so identifiable in, when I think about my own experience, but just the human condition, Absolutely. So we've got these four core, and when I love your image of these like four stories of a building, and when one kind of starts falling, you start seeing the foundations crumbling a little bit. Or the domino effect too, but the poor self-image, what we think of ourselves, and then how much worth we attribute to ourselves. You can imagine, I can imagine, in the tsunami of stress, we've got change happening. We sense this perceived threat, and then boom, 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 boom. It's like dominoes. We get these core issues really get attacked or knocked. And I'm sure, would you say that for some of us, I would imagine that they apply to all of us, right? Yep. But do you find that some people have one that's like more
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why what will stress me out and cause a great sense of need for me doesn't affect you, but it will affect me. And what affects you and is a source of I've just got to have that, or temptation or stress or need or whatever that is, I'm not touched by it. That's not my issue. Yeah. Because those things go back into our own personal histories of things that we've experienced. And whether it's a four-story structure and the bottom of it starts to collapse and then everything collapses in on itself, or it's dominoes that fall one after the other. It's just a reaction, which is flee and fight and flee and fight.
And then that all over again.
And all over again. And going back to the tsunami, if we were to take the time, they just repeat.
Yeah. And so within the flee, the fight, the flee, the flight, we've got these core issues just interweaving through all of them.
Yep.
Wow. One of the things that I wanted to, you mentioned this, I think earlier, just about change. I think it's just a fascinating topic. You know, the reason why we're in the tsunami and the reason why we're experiencing core issues in the tsunami is because we're sensing that threat, which we talked about. You know, these are, some people use the word triggers, or, you know, things that we're experiencing now, but actually what's happening is like 30 years ago or whatever, and we're experiencing the whole history all in one 2-minute reaction, which is why we overreact at times to certain things.
Totally.
But I think with change, there's also an opportunity in there.
Always.
And I would love to unpack that a little bit. And I think even with the core issues, these spaces of, in some ways, vulnerability in the tsunami of stress, there's also core strengths. And there's a reason why those things are core issues, because they're also potentially core strengths. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Change just is. And change can be experienced as beneficial stress or detrimental stress. But change just is. For there not to be any change, just talk to someone in a situation that is stagnant, where nothing changes. Someone, elderly person in a nursing home, there is no change. Every day is exactly the same as the last day, and that is incredibly stressful, even as they're trying to have things not change. Well, no change is as stressful as all sorts of change that's constant, and nothing is settled. Human beings like a sense of, yes, there's enough that's changed and interesting, but enough that's familiar to be okay with and I can manage and cope. So either way, it's about change. And if we are alive, we experience change.
And change can be a good thing.
Change is a good thing. It's just our perception of it and the potential in it, the opportunity in it, or this is not an opportunity. And because of those perceptions, which will be the subject of another podcast, those seemingly rational perceptions that happen in a very distinctive pattern. That all being said, these core issues, because of seemingly rational perceptions, because of distorted experiences of relationships and situations, happens because of past experiences. What was modeled for us? What was rewarded for us? What was imposed on us? And those core issues on the one side of the spectrum, actually on the other side of the spectrum, which is actually rational, which is managed change, which is a sense of this is an opportunity, those core issues actually have an opposite alternative, which is a sense of core strengths. And the core strengths are just as real, and I would argue are actually rational, just as much, if not more, than the core issues are. They just don't feel that way because the stress has not been normalized and we're reactive to it in the flee, fight escalation.
So in some ways, the tsunami of stress, when we're unable to manage stress, it's out of control, we're in that cycle, that's when it pulls us into those core issues. But if we can normalize stress, which we do in autonomic healing,
absolutely,
which is the good news, then we can enter into a space where these core issues suddenly become core strengths.
Yes. And the core issue of inadequacy and insecurity can become a core strength of security and capability. I am secure. I am capable. Does that mean I'm not threatened? No, I'm secure. Why do I have a sense of being secure? Because I'm capable.
Yeah.
And I'm capable, and that feeds security.
I mean, it's an entirely different way of approaching change, isn't it? So, the same thing can happen.
Exactly.
The very same set of circumstances could happen to someone, and if they're in the tsunami of stress, then there's this like, I can't, I'm like inadequate, I'm insecure, I don't know, it's overwhelming. Whereas actually if stress is normalized, then it's not like it's all great, but I'm capable. I'm not overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I'm secure in this. In some ways, the circumstances don't have such a huge impact.
They aren't determinative of well-being because homeostasis and activating homeostasis is well-being. I have a sense of well-being. I have a sense of contentment. Does that mean I'm happy? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm content. It's okay. And what is the opportunity? And this is far more than just positive thinking. This is a realistic appraisal of what is the possibility in this? What is the opportunity in this, rather than looking at the threat and the liability, and this is a terrible thing, and I'm insecure and incapable. Well, I can become secure and capable. I can grow. I can learn from this. I can love in this. I can act in service in this. All sorts of possibilities, because change just is. It's our perception of the change, our experience of the change. And that sense of that core strength, that initial one, allows us to experience a sense of contentment. I'm secure. I am capable. Now, does that mean I can do everything, that I can protect myself entirely? It's not necessary.
Yes.
But in this, I can manage this.
I mean, it's huge, really, when you think about human beings. You know, if we all could access this and how the dynamics would shift so dramatically.
They do.
If we, you know, could navigate change, circumstances, even hardship, with this sense of security and feeling capable of navigating. I mean, it's a real game changer.
It is.
Just that one.
And that allows us a sense of contentment. And then what can build from that and we're talking about rational intimacy now. That's a totally different paradigm than the tsunami of stress. But in rational intimacy, it begins with a sense of contentment, which is that core strength of secure and capable. And then that can build into, this is not dominoes falling. This is not some negative dynamic. This is a very beneficial dynamic. And it shifts then along with the sense of security and capability to a sense of feeling empowered. I'm secure. I'm capable. That's empowering.
Yeah.
And I can act. Not only am I secure and capable, I am empowered. And I can move forward with things. And what that allows us is to experience the second stage in rational intimacy, which I call the second stage is grace. And with grace, that word has a dual meaning. Grace is a sense of poise. I can manage this. Grace under fire. Poise while stressed.
Yeah.
Because I am empowered.
Yeah.
But grace also is a word that is often associated, and historically, back in the Greek times, charis, it was a word that meant a gift. And being empowered and empowering people is a gift. And it's this wonderful gift. And the more we are empowered, the more of a gift that is sensed and experienced as, and the more we can see things as gifts. And poise. And those go hand in glove. And which is the hand in glove? It doesn't matter. But that allows me, in that sense of contentment, to be empowered. And I can act. And then that escalates and builds and increases into the third stage of rational intimacy, which is a sense of engagement. I'm content. I'm empowered. I'm gifted. I have poise. And then that grows into that third stage of rational intimacy, which is engagement. I'm connected. I'm involved. I'm engaged. I'm not running. Far from it. I'm involved. I'm connected. And the reason for that is because it's not an issue of control. That third core strength is influence. And we are influential in a very beneficial way in our own lives, in a situation, in the relationship, and we are influential.
Wow. I mean, it's so different, isn't it, from what we described in the tsunami of stress and the core issues. So instead of feeling the powerlessness of that second core issue, you're empowered. And in that space of grace, it's a real gift, certainly. Instead of distress, discontent, grace. And then moving on from that third core strength of being influential, instead of this lack of control, which sends us into isolation, we are, okay, we have this ability to influence and bring our own change into the situation.
Control's an illusion anyway.
And what about the fourth core issue, which was poor self-image and low self-esteem? What's the core strength there? Like, what's the opposite in rational intimacy?
Yep. The alternative then is a healthy self-image and a sober self-esteem. Healthy self-image. I have an image of myself. It's a healthy one. It's not a negative one. It is a healthy, vibrant, this is me. This is my image. I'm me. I'm a person. I matter. I'm significant. And a sober self-esteem. And I use sober self-esteem because one of the things that I've noticed over the course of my career is that human beings tend to struggle in one direction or another related to self-esteem. There are those who are all about themselves and they are God's gift to the world and they are it. And that is an overly inflated sense of self-esteem. Yeah. We can think too much of ourselves. And the other people are going, really? Okay, great. Good luck with that. But I know you real well, and that seems to be a bit of an inflated self-esteem. But there's the opposite that we struggle with too. And that's a negative self-esteem, a poor self-esteem. We don't think of ourselves realistically or value ourselves to the degree that we certainly can and should. And when I do psychological testing, those are the things that invalidate.
Yeah.
It's either random responding, they're not answering consistently, or their answers are overly inflated. And it's like, are you actually a human being? And do you have issues? No, really? Okay. Well, it's not a valid psychological profile. Or it is so pessimistic. It is so negative about self, just running the person down. It's like, no, you're not the worst human being who has ever inhabited the planet.
Yeah.
It's not realistic. So we tend to err one direction or another. And that's why I talk about a sober self-esteem.
Yes.
To see ourselves as worth, but I'm not either the worst thing that's ever happened in the world, nor the best or the greatest. I'm me and I feel good about that.
Yeah. I think that's so freeing, isn't it? Because I think you can swing the other way.
Absolutely.
You know, I come from more of the low self-esteem.
That's a pretty common one.
I think so. But what we don't want to do is have another false sense of worth in the opposite direction. And then also I love those two words, healthy self-image, because that is about understanding who we are and not projecting. We have all of I think people get caught up in wanting to be like someone else or having a false sense of our own, a projected sense of who we might be.
Or people projected onto us.
Exactly, from upbringing.
Absolutely.
But I think what we're talking about here is to say, to be healthy, it's to be content with who we actually are. And that being that person is the best place we can be.
Yes. And it's all about our reaction or response to change. Change just is. And we can be reactive to it or we can respond to it. And there's all the world of difference between being reactive and responding. And that's choice. And we always have a choice. We frequently don't even believe we do, but it doesn't mean we don't. We do. And then it's either the tsunami and we try to breathe underwater, or we really breathe and live and enjoy our lives.
I'm just thinking about that last core strength in rational intimacy and the benefit of I think there's just a sense of relief of being healthy, being sober in our worth. And what that looks like. What does that freedom look like? Would you just talk into that a little bit more?
It means I don't have to be someone I'm not, even if other people think of me that way and want to impose that on me. Or I try to impose that on myself. I can be content. And then I can appreciate who I am and what I've accomplished. There was a story that I shared with you at one point, and I love to climb 14ers. Yeah. Although I swear at 65, they're much higher than 14,000 feet. But I'm sure it's probably not that they are higher. It's just that I'm getting older. Anyway, my point is I love to climb the 14,000 foot peaks, and I've done nearly 20 of them over the years. And with climbing a peak, there's always this idea of, did you summit? I have a very different take on that. And this isn't a rational and justification for when I haven't summited. It's the idea of the summit is as far as you can go. There is a limit. The top of the mountain is the top of the mountain, and unless you can flap your arms and fly, that's as high as you're going to go. That is your limit of capability, and you've reached that. So is this an external or an internal thing? And I was climbing, this is some years ago, and I was climbing with my brother and my nephews, and one of my nephews has some physical difficulties with balance. And when the trail started to get much more rough, and there's this scree that's the loose gravel and that sort of thing, that was the limit of his ability to balance and climb, and that was as high as he could get. And my other nephew, a hockey player and a soccer player and all that, he was ready to go and he could keep going. And my brother and I had a conversation about what do we do at this juncture. And I said, why don't you go on? You've never been to the top of a 14er. And why don't you go? And I've been had been up to the top of that one several times. And so I said, I'll go back and we'll go down. And I pointed out a particular patch of snow. And I thought this might be helpful to my other nephew who was going back down with me. And I said, I want you to look at that patch of snow and I want you to focus on it and memorize it. He said, okay. And then we went down and we got to the bottom. And as we were waiting for my brother and his brother to come back down from as far as they had gotten to the summit, and I didn't know whether they'd gotten to the summit or not. And as we were waiting, I pointed back up toward that patch of snow. And it wasn't that far from the peak, but it wasn't on the peak, which many people think, well, you didn't summit. And I looked at that and I pointed out to him and I said, look at how much of the mountain you climbed and how little is left. And I said, you reached as far as you could go. When your brother and my brother get down, they will have reached as far as they could go. That was their summit. And that patch of snow was right by your summit. So, well done. You summited a 14er.
Wow.
Now, are there those who would take issue with that and say, well, no, he didn't. Yeah, he did. That's the truth. That's reality. And that is all the difference between inadequacy and insecurity and feeling powerless and a lack of control and it getting into poor self-image and low self-esteem, or a sense of contentment and secure and capable to have gotten that far and to have summited. And then that sense of feeling empowered. I did that. That was an accomplishment. And then that sense of being influential positively in his own life and in other people's lives. If you shared that story, that could be very influential in other people's. That's influential, could be in his own life. And then the healthy self-image and the sober self-esteem.
I love that story, Tom. It's just really striking and it's empowering for all of us to know that, I think the drivenness that is very present in our Western culture is we don't even enjoy the successes that we achieve because we're so worried about the small bit of mountain that we haven't climbed. And so I think being able to live presently in that space is incredibly freeing and powerful.
My son and daughter are avid climbers and outdoor adventurers and things like that. And together they climbed a couple of years ago a volcanic peak covered with snow in South America. And they'd gotten near the top, and the ice and the snow was unstable, and it was not safe to continue. And they made the decision, wisely, not to risk that and to turn around and come back. They summited that. They did.
Yeah.
And they lived to tell about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they could enjoy and appreciate that accomplishment. And I'm so proud of them for that. I've climbed, like I say, and I have reached the top limit geographically of how high I could go for about 18 14ers. Have I climbed to the top of every single one? No. If there is lightning, you turn around and you go back, or you shelter behind a boulder or something. Any number of times. It's climbing the mountain. That's the point.
I love that there's a journey for us all to recognise our own summits. And that's where that sober self-worth comes from, that healthy self-image comes from. We're kind of centered on that space, and we get to celebrate the summits in our lives.
And then we're influential in a beneficial way in our own lives and in the lives of others. And we're empowered, and we empower others because we can experience a sense of contentment. Is life what I would want it to be at this moment? I can name half a dozen or more reasons not. I can also give you a much longer list of ways that it is. Why? Because of that sense of security and capability. Yep.
Thank you, Tom. I've enjoyed this conversation, and we'll be talking more about rational intimacy, autonomic healing activation as we continue. We'll look forward to the next one.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.